I'm going to give you guys a very brief primer into Bitcoin, and 90 minutes for Bitcoin is something extremely brief, and I say this to you as somebody that spent thousands of hours studying Bitcoin, and I still don't know anything about Bitcoin. And I know a lot about Bitcoin, and I still don't know anything about Bitcoin. So this will be a journey in 5 acts. And you'll find with Bitcoin, it's not just a journey of the pocketbook or the bank balance. It's also a journey of the soul. So that sounds like a big statement to come out with, but hopefully you're sold on that statement in 89 minutes time. So the first act will be 21 easy to digest facts about Bitcoin. The second act will be about money and the concept of scarcity. The third act will be why Bitcoin is the money of the people. The fifth act is I'll be using an analogy and comparing Bitcoin to a startup company. So if anybody here has experience in VC or startups or anything like that, maybe that'll help you understand Bitcoin in a different light. And finally, we get to the investment and securing part. So I'll only really be talking about wealth building strategies and all of that for maybe about 7 minutes of the whole presentation. But with that said, my goals for this weekend is everybody here leaves with enough knowledge of Bitcoin's technical, economic, and social aspects to be able to give them more confidence in investing. Not, Bitcoin's been going up, might seem like a good thing. How about I buy some? I hate it when I hear stories like that. I usually do prefer it when somebody has, the more knowledge you have about Bitcoin, the more comfortable you'll be increasing its percentage in your portfolio. So the goal is for everyone here by the end of the weekend to get off zero if you're not already on zero. So who's currently on zero when it comes to crypto and Bitcoin? Actually, not that many, actually. So hopefully by the end of today, I can get you guys off zero. And I'll also go through the exercise of downloading a mobile wallet, and I'll give you a couple of suggestions about the good wallets options that are out there. So about me, doesn't really matter who I am, just what matters is the message. But to give you an idea of who I am, I've got a Bachelor of Civil Structural Engineering, a Masters of Civil Engineering, and an MBA from Oxford. And it was my experience and time in Oxford 6 years ago that really pushed me towards what Bitcoin can do as a social movement. And then the more and more I found out about it and studied economics and technology, I see it as a triple bottom line movement. So let's get into the first act. 21 facts about Bitcoin. Fact number 1, Bitcoin is a get poor quick scheme, not a get rich quick scheme. So tread very wisely. Don't try timing the market or any of that kind of stuff. Invest in education first. The more educated you are, the more you'll be able to assess your risk for getting into Bitcoin. Fact number 2, Bitcoin was created 11 years ago by a person or a group of people called Satoshi Nakamoto, using a pseudonymous name. Bitcoin with a capital B is the monetary system. Bitcoin with a lowercase b is its currency. So that's already a big part of the confusion around Bitcoin. So everything in Bitcoin is Bitcoin. Bitcoin, the system is Bitcoin. Bitcoin, the money is Bitcoin, so on and so forth. But with that said, there'll only ever be 21 million Bitcoins. That's the rule baked in to the code. Don't worry though, every Bitcoin can currently be split into 100 million Satoshis, which is the base unit of Bitcoin. And at $1 million a Bitcoin, 1 Satoshi will have the same purchasing power as a cent. So at a higher Bitcoin price, we can add decimals if need be, but we probably won't need to do that for 10 to 20 years. Yeah, there's bold, making the claim that Bitcoin will be $1 million in 10 years. Fact 5. So it's estimated that out of these 21 million, 2 to 4 million are already gone. They're lost. They're no longer accessible. By lost, I mean the private key to the Bitcoin safe has been lost, so the safe can no longer be cracked. And we'll talk about more about safes and safe cracking in a couple of slides. So blockchain technology is just a buzzword, right? Bitcoin's the only important blockchain. It's the only thing that has, use in terms of censorship resistance, scarcity, hardness of money, salability, and the like. So beware of the term blockchain and do your own research before you venture down that road. Fact 7, okay, Bitcoin. So all of your Bitcoin are stored in the blockchain, right? And imagine every address on the Bitcoin is simply a safe. So these are your public keys. So everyone knows whose safe it is. But because Bitcoin's pseudonymous, you can't put a name to the safe. So the person that owns this is 3AXP, and like a string of 24 letters and numbers. And then you have your private keys, which are your personal key, which will open up your safe and be able to pull money out of it. But if you lose your keys, you've lost your Bitcoin. The blockchain is literally a sequential chain of transaction batches known as blocks. So you have a block of data, and within this block is all transaction data. And new blocks are added to the chain or mined every 10 minutes. So when you hear about Bitcoin mining, it means the production of blocks, batching the transaction in a block and stamping it in the blockchain. So once it's stamped in time in the blockchain, can't be changed or modified. It's there forever, which also means finality of transactions. So if you send money to someone by accident, can't be changed. That's it. It's unidirectional payment. So literally digital cash. You leave cash on a table. You shouldn't really expect to come back and find it when you come back to the room a couple of hours later. So this stamping effort also needs a lot of energy, and we'll talk about energy a little later. And for the use of this energy, miners are rewarded with a block reward and all transaction fees within that block. So the block reward is the process of minting not minting new Bitcoins, discovering part of the 21 million that are slated to exist. So fact 9. So in Bitcoin, time is also measured in blocks. So you don't really talk about, it's going to need 14 days for something to happen. You say it's going to need 2016 blocks. And I'll talk more about these specific numbers, 2016 and 210,000, shortly. So this 4-year period is known as a reward era. Right, so how much Bitcoin you're rewarded for mining each block. And at the end of the era, the block reward halves. So the inflation gets lower and lower. So this is a Bitcoin supply versus the block reward. So in the first 210,000 blocks, the reward was 50 Bitcoin. And at the end of the first reward era, there was 10.5 million Bitcoin. Reward halved to 25, then to 12.5. We're currently in this third era, about here. So in April, May, it halves again. And as you can notice, it's very high inflation, and then it tapers out. And here in the year 2036, you see that there's only 160,000 Bitcoin left to mine. It'll take until the year 2140 to mine these last 100-odd thousand. And then from there's no more block reward. The miners are purely incentivized with transaction fees. So the main characters in the Bitcoin ecosystem are the miners, the nodes, and the users. And we'll talk about each of these characters next. So the nodes enforce the rules of the protocol and verify all the transactions. And they also define what a miner actually is. So the miners produce blocks and effectively secure the network. And they secure it with a lot of power. The users are anyone who uses Bitcoin. And users can also be miners, and they can also be nodes. Anyone is free to run a node or to try to mine. Although like mining is very, very difficult these days. So another analogy you could make was back in '09, you could pan for gold, and to get gold out of the ground now, you need to be BHP. Very similar thing with the evolution of Bitcoin mining technology over the past decade. Anyone with a substantial amount of Bitcoin should consider running a node. And a lot of this discussion will be centered around nodes and sovereignty and being your own bank. So don't worry about too much about what a node is right now. We're going to go thoroughly into what a node is. Fact 12. So the network is currently secured by more computing power than the top 10 supercomputers in the world. So 200 times more than the top 10 combined. And these supercomputers cost tens of millions of dollars. So if you were to add all of these supercomputers up and try to build 200 of them like immediately in a day, it'd still cost you billions and billions of dollars to try to attack the Bitcoin network, and you'd probably only sustain an attack maybe for 2 or 3 hours. So this computational power is known as the network hash rate, and it's been growing by about 6% every fortnight, relentlessly for a decade. And there you'll see, so everything in Bitcoin, also you can't view Bitcoin linearly. It's an exponential technology, and to that end, everything must be plotted in a log scale. So the white line is the network hash rate, and the yellow line is the price. And you'll notice that Bitcoin was being mined for a good year and a half before it even started trading. So it was really, for this time period, a game amongst nerds in that first year and a half. They broke a lot of things. In that time period, somebody exposed a bug that created 18 billion Bitcoin out of thin air. But since there was only 20 people using it, and it didn't really have a price or anything, they're like, all right, let's just patch this one up, rewind the chain for a couple of hours and move forward. So in Bitcoin's history, it's had 99.98% uptime, and the downtime that Bitcoin had was during this Stack Overflow bug somewhere in here. So it's a pretty resilient system. And as you can see, price also is logarithmic. Now, if you were to view Bitcoin's price in linear scale, it'd look like this. But when you view it in log, it's volatile, but has upward volatility non-stop. So this level of security, this computing power, is needed for unforgeable costliness. Now, what unforgeable costliness means is that it's so expensive to forge a Bitcoin that it's just economically unviable. So Bitcoin does use a lot of energy, but let's have a look at the context. So a lot of people say, yeah, Bitcoin uses more power than Ireland, but come on, it's Ireland, who cares? Look at, right? So if Bitcoin uses more than Ireland, where does Ireland sit in the scheme of the world's power? Nowhere, it's a minnow. So every year the world produces about 160,000 terawatt hours of primary energy supply. 50,000 of that is wasted, and that 50,000 alone of waste energy could power Bitcoin over 2,000 times today. And already a lot of mining containers are being sent out to coal and fracking mines and natural gas mines, because in all of those processes you need to flare methane. So anytime you go or see a mine on TV, you'll notice that there's a flame flaring something off. And that's because it's better for the environment to burn methane than to just let it release altogether. So people are connecting this flared gas up to Bitcoin mining rigs and mining off flared gas. And it can also be used to capture any stranded energy assets. So if you had a solar farm out in the desert, you could just bring the power use to it, and the energy company can make some good money. And also further, don't worry too much. Bitcoin runs on the grid. So if it's running on a grid that's powered by renewables, Bitcoin has no emissions. And in 10 to 15 years, with the way renewable costs are looking, it'll be completely economically unviable to mine with coal, even in China. So in China, hydro is starting to beat coal on a price per kilowatt. And also the Three Gorges Dam in China produces more energy than Bitcoin needs. So that's just one hydro plant. Fact 14. The concept of network difficulty ensures that blocks aren't mined too quickly. So we're trying to target blocks coming out every 10 minutes or so. So every 2016 blocks, the network checks back into the past 2016 blocks and sees how quickly the average block time is. So if the average time is less than 10 minutes, that means more miners have come in and they're able to solve the computational problem quicker. So the network difficulty is increased to retarget 10 minutes. Otherwise, the opposite is true. So it's all very self-regulating. There's lots of very tasty technical details in there, and Satoshi, it would appear, has covered all of the bases in thinking of this system they designed. Fact 15. So Bitcoin is simply a root layer protocol, and like other layer 2 solutions can be built on top of it. So this isn't very different to like the TCP/IP stack that we know about the internet. And you have UDP, FTP. So all of these are protocols. Now currently, there's a new protocol that's been added to the Bitcoin stack. It's called the Lightning Network. So now you have an LMP/BP stack where Lightning functions on top of Bitcoin. Now Lightning can theoretically do 1 million transactions per second, but it just needs to develop liquidity and channels. Lightning is still in beta, so give it another year or year and a half and it'll be ready for prime time. Now you also have side chains that are layer 2 but don't act as a stack. It acts as a peg to Bitcoin. So you peg in Bitcoin into the liquid sidechain, you do whatever you need to do on the chain, and then you peg back out into Bitcoin. As you can see, this is already putting a lot of risk on the business models of the majority of altcoins out there. So as an ultra secure system that's backed by a lot of energy, space on the blockchain is like very scarce and it should be very expensive. And that's why it's not geared towards purchasing coffee. So would anyone send a postcard through a through a container ship, or would you send it in the mail? Anyone want to use a container ship? Yeah, so why would you buy coffee with Bitcoin? Bitcoin is the container ship. Lightning is the envelope. So there's only enough block space on layer 1 Bitcoin to handle 5,000 transactions a block, or about 250 million transactions per year. I think Visa might process 1 trillion transactions per year. This gives you complete finality, security, and unforgeable costliness. And Lightning, using Lightning Network, you're talking at less than a cent per transaction fees. So Lightning is really starting to come into its own, and layer 3 solutions are already starting to be built on top of Lightning, even though Lightning is still in beta. So this throughput will increase, and it's always increasing as the base protocol gets more and more advanced and more developers enter the ecosystem. And in about 18 to 24 months, with a big protocol improvement, Bitcoin's utility will be increased dramatically. I won't get into the technical elements though. So Bitcoin commenced trading in March 2010. So the network was launched in January 2009, so it didn't start trading till quite a bit later. And it first traded at 10 Bitcoins for 3 cents. Fact 18, so there are currently 6 satellites beaming down the Bitcoin blockchain from space. So if you don't have internet or anything, you can set up a dish on your roof, configure it, and you'll be able to download the blockchain from space. There's a lot of mesh networking in the Bitcoin world, because Bitcoin is effectively, we exist to be skeptics of the government and try to overthrow them in the long term. And I'll show you more about revolution and overthrowing the governments a little bit later. So you can also set up a mesh network. We've got a mesh here in Sydney. So if the government tries to shut down the internet on us one day, like they do in China, we can mesh network between each other, get a satellite feed. Ham radio can be used to transact Bitcoin, and ham is bounced off the ionosphere, so you can send it anywhere in the world. So if a nuke hits Bitcoin, if you've got a solar panel with a battery and a ham radio, you're still sorted. You can still transact on Bitcoin. Bitcoin has died 377 times, and you can check it out in this link, in this obituary. So the king is dead. Long live the king. Finally, Bitcoin is the ultimate way to put your money where your mouth is. And this is the most important thing, and this is the journey of the soul. So if you object to today's state of global affairs, wild money printing and inflation, extreme wealth and income inequality, take your stand, and just by buying Bitcoin, you're taking a big stand. So that's the end of Act 1. So to keep you guys awake, this is question and answer time. So fire away your questions. Anyone got any questions? Absolutely.
Bitcoin's ability to transact blocks, it's quite a slow process.
Yes.
Now. And I also understand that miners are even paying for the opportunity to mine blocks as well. It is slow by design. And I'll tell you why. When we establish bases on the moon, will we be transacting in US dollar or Aussie dollar or euro? Probably not. We'll be using Bitcoin. And it needs a 10-minute block time to be able to relay from the moon and back. So this was actually geared for interplanetary uses. So it's not just an Earth money. This is the money for our future. So you have a block every 10 minutes. So to be really sure, to have a 0% chance of your coin being double spent, you have to wait for 6 confirmations, which will take 60 minutes. But Bitcoin is so secure, people are willing to take a 98% chance that their transaction is final, and you only need 1 confirmation for that. But if you want to be 100% sure about transaction finality, so let's say I'm sending you $1 billion. Right now, to send $1 billion, you probably have to wait a month, and you're probably going to have to pay $20 million fee or whatever it is, which isn't a lot when you're transacting $1 billion. But on Bitcoin, people move $1 billion frequently for like $6 or $7, and it takes an hour, and they're sure that after this hour, the $1 billion is in the bank. So like I said, not geared for coffee. Now, with regards to miners always face the decision. Should I buy Bitcoin or should I mine Bitcoin? So they do their numbers, and if it's cheaper for them to mine it, they'll buy their computer rigs and all that kind of stuff and start mining. But if it's not worth it for them, they just buy it. And that's why you see such a big relationship between mining hash power and price. So it always resolves around that. Is it more worth it for me to mine or more worth it for me to buy? Have you heard of miners fighting to get a hold of the blocks to mine? And they're even buying for that privilege?
It's all based on random statistics.
Yeah.
So let's say you hold 10% of the network hash power. On average, you'll mine 10% of the blocks. So it's based on a Poisson distribution. Sometimes blocks come out in a minute, and sometimes blocks come out in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
But on average, 9.4 minutes, as we've seen over the past decade. So that's why the difficulty keeps increasing every fortnight, because and it is a game of who can get the cheapest power and who can get the cheapest equipment. So right now it's mainly North America. So Canadian hydro and American wind, and Chinese coal and hydro. So whoever
Survive the crash?
will anything.
Yeah.
So we'll see. We'll talk more about the crash and the scale of what that crash is going to be, because as a Bitcoiner, I eat a 40% crash for breakfast. Like, it's fine, I'm used to it now after all these years. But if the S&P were to take a 40% hit, it'll be the end of the world.
So you're
Literally, it'll be.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. So any other questions before we get on to Act 2? Yeah, absolutely.
Bit of a far out question, but since you mentioned it, what do you think the big picture is in terms of it being a tool for the future
Yeah.
and it being interplanetary? Why do you raise that?
Because unless we figure out a plan B, at least over our physical environment. So Bitcoin is plan B for our economy, and the moon or Mars are plan B for our civilization. So China's going to the moon, Elon Musk with Tesla's going to the moon, we're already looking at Mars. These things all sound
out there, but 70 years ago, flying from USA to Australia on a commercial plane was also very, very far out there. And if you just look at, your mobile phone 15 years ago, did you ever think you'd be doing what you're doing on your phone now 15 years ago? So there's a lot of billionaires, Jeff Bezos, they're all looking to space. And nobody will be transacting in US dollar on space, I can guarantee you. If it is, seems funny to me. Any other questions?
With regards to security,
yeah.
Quantum computing, where do you see it?
It's quite far away, but yeah. So ECDSA, so the elliptical curve digital signature algorithm, might be vulnerable to quantum computing if quantum computing ever happens, which I think you probably couldn't do quantum computing on an ECDSA. But that protocol improvement I was talking about over the next 18-24 months is the Schnorr signature and taproot, and that's quantum resistant. So it's 18 to 24 months away, but I think we'll beat quantum computers there. All right, money and scarcity. This is the fun part. This is the big crash. So ever wonder how money was actually created? Has anyone thought about where money comes from? I'll show you where it comes from. So, whoa. Okay, so the US government talks to the Fed. Hey, Mr. Fed, I need some cash. And the Fed says, you got any bonds for me? The government says, many as you need. Say no more. So a few minutes later, here you go, $1 trillion in bonds. My man, here's a $1 trillion in cash, hot off the press. Now this doesn't have to be physical paper cash. This is probably 5% physical paper cash and 95% numbers on a screen. Thanks for saving my ass with this cash. Don't even worry about it. Come see us often, don't be a stranger. We got as much cash as you like. So government then says, government says to the big players, the ones close to the money, here's some cash to deposit into my account. Keep the bills paid, but hold 10% in reserve. And they said, don't worry, we're not gamblers. Of course, we'll hold 10% in reserve. So $1 trillion goes to the close to the money folk. And then the close to the money folks say, hey, anyone need to borrow any money? And then we ask, how much are you lending on? 90%, come get it. Well, in America, 90%, but they'll loan out as much as they can. So the bank transfers $900 billion to the market in credit, but also the bank opens up a credit on their books as well, corresponding to the loan. So all of a sudden, you have $1 trillion, 1.9 trillion of money in the system. So 900 billion now has been created out of nothing. So the market that's just borrowed money goes through the same process, deposits it in the banking system, and then the banking system says, I bet you don't even know we're creating money out of nothing. Do you useless idiot? And we say, what? And they're like, don't even worry about it. Just forget I mentioned anything. Again, process goes, hey, anyone need to borrow money? Yep, here's some cash. All of that kind of stuff goes back and forth. You rinse it and repeat it. And the eventual outcome is $1 trillion went into the bank and 10 trillion money created out of thin air. And back in the old days, it was the millions game. And because of the way the exponential function works, millions turned into billions, turned into trillions, turned into quadrillions quite soon. And we'll look at, anyone heard of a quadrillion before? Yeah, me neither. So we're going to get into the quadrillions in a few minutes. So here's the central bank balance sheets. Yardeni Research updates this every week. When I first put this presentation together only 2 weeks ago when I was first putting it together. Since then, since those 2 weeks, the world's central banks have put on $600 billion between them in only 3 weeks. So the Fed's books are now up to 4 trillion, the European Central Bank up to 5.2 trillion, Bank of Japan 5.3 trillion, People Bank of China 5.1 trillion. These are just the big four. There's a lot more. So how did we get here? Tricky Dick. And we'll get back to what Tricky Dick did in a few minutes. So money evolved over like millennia until like, you know, we settled on gold. So why gold? You know, gold's beautiful. It is scarce like Bitcoin, but if we're thinking space, gold is infinite. So just the other week, they found an asteroid that if we mined it has $70 quadrillion of metals on it. Obviously, no one's going to mine it because it's not worth mining in space. But eventually, if we run out of metals on Earth, like rare earth metals, we might have to go to space. So gold also, like Bitcoin, has a decentralized supply. Like gold is great, and now we have digital gold in the form of Bitcoin. And when you look at the environmental and social costs of gold, it's too big to ignore. So I don't have any gold, never will. And if I can find the amenable partner, I'll just be buying her some Bitcoin equivalent of a engagement ring, and then stamping my love for them eternally in the Bitcoin blockchain, so that everyone knows it's eternal. I dare you to do that to any girl, and she'll prefer the diamond ring. So maybe I just need to sell it a bit harder. Yeah. So gold was the standard in Europe between 1870 and 1914. So in 1914, though, they decided to just get off it so they could kill each other in Europe. Tanks aren't free, so you need to print money. So it was re-established, though, in most places post-war in the mid-20s. But then the Depression hit in the late 20s, and they threw gold away again. On the American side, they had a bimetal standard when they were first starting out as a country, so they used gold and silver. That was abandoned so they could kill each other in the Civil War. And then once the Civil War was won, they went back to gold. Later on, just before the war, the US government started to fractionally gold back their currency. So if I give you $1, you can get 40 cents of gold for it. In 33, it was suspended for the Depression, and in 34, gold was banned and confiscated. In 44, after the war was mainly done, after the European theatre was done at least, the powers, the victors in Europe, all gathered in Bretton Woods in America, and everyone agreed that all global currency was going to be pinned to the US dollar, and the dollar was going to be backed by gold. Everyone shook hands, and it was a nice period in history.
So Hans, just clarify who's everyone, because I reckon there's
all right, so it would have been the Western European powers, the Western European victors, England, France, Italy. Soviet Union did their own thing. So anything east of Berlin didn't come to Bretton Woods, everything west did. Now look at this period.
No, I want to get this really clear, guys. Who do you reckon was at Bretton Woods? You should Google this, because it's freaking interesting. Do you reckon it was government or someone else? Rothschild.
Yeah, it was someone else.
It was the bankers.
Yeah, the bankers, yeah.
So when he says powers, it wasn't the government, it was the bankers. And when people think that, if you haven't, and I didn't want to go into this, but I think it's really important. At the end of the day, guys, that someone's printing money. The world owes $73 trillion, but to who? Right? No one had $73 trillion to lend in the first place. And if you have a look at the details, the central banks, the Federal Reserve Bank of America is not owned by their government.
Private company, yeah.
Privately by big banks that are then owned by private families. So does that make sense? Yeah?
It is
I
100.
think that it was our governments that are in control of this
No,
world.
it's 100% fact, and I'll be talking about that when I talk about the Cantillon effect as well, which is coming up in a few minutes. But if you notice, during the Bretton Woods period, look how chill the world was. No banking crises. And either side of it, have a look at this once the standard was abandoned. So in 71, the standard was abandoned by Nixon. Again, kill people. Not just that, there was so much dollar around the world that they couldn't physically back it, and most of the world's gold was in Fort Knox. So they had some pretty good leverage as well. So does anybody notice any like recurring themes over here? So as Mark said, it's effectively big bankers sending the poor off to war, really. So when I say Bitcoin is a journey of the soul and something quite spiritual, imagine you can have something so scarce to make war economically unviable. So let's have a look at the post-fiat world, but first, before we do that, we're going to visit the canceling effect. So Friedrich von Hayek, one of the original people of the Austrian School of Economics, is if you pour honey into a cup, it won't spread out evenly. It'll first clump up in the middle and then spread itself out. That's how money works as well. So when money's pumped into the system by the Fed, by the central banks and the government, the people that are closest to the money get it first. Big banks, asset owners. So if I own a house and the government prints money, all of a sudden there's more dollars than houses and my house price goes up. Simple mechanics. So it's really the rich that get richer and the poor that get poorer. So prices rise and none of this cash splash out has reached the people. So here's what going off the standard has produced. So this is from a website. It's a cool website. It's called WTF Happened in 1971. So if you have a look at this, the 95th percentile earners their wages have gone up through the roof. Everyone else has stayed flat. Real GDP versus wages. So the GDP has gone through the roof per capita and no one's making any money. Right, the bottom 90% of earners, great growing middle class, strong economy, middle class, 1971, nothing. And all the bankers, lawyers, financiers started getting their pay rises. And this ends at 2010. It's time is exponential. So this is up here now, right? Because this trend doesn't change. Percent on percent on percent, when viewed in a linear chart, you'll end up with the discretionary. Right? CPI, almost 300 years of it, 250 years of it, nothing. Spikes during wars, of course. You gotta pay for war. 71, we lost the backing. Have a look. House prices, 71, flat, through the roof. Debt in the States alone, and this is old, so this is 2010, 12, 13. I think the States are sitting at 23 trillion in debt. So how much money is actually out there then? All right, so in gold, there's about $8 trillion of above ground gold. 29 trillion in base money around the world, so that's cash and coin in circulation. Bank money is the cash they have in their vaults. There's 57 trillion in government bonds. There's 161 trillion in corporate and munis. 250 trillion in real estate. Non-monetary commodities, agricultural hedges and all that kind of stuff. 300 trillion, and there's 1 quadrillion of derivatives. Bitcoin, on the other hand, has a market cap of 0.17 trillion. So as you can see, Bitcoin is nothing in the global scheme of money and currency.
Yes.
So yet, but I see that tipping very quickly, and by quickly I mean 10 to 15 years, and you'll see why when I analogize Bitcoin with a startup. So most importantly, 1 Bitcoin equal 1 Bitcoin. So when we say that to people, they look at us like, what do you mean 1 Bitcoin equal 1 Bitcoin? 1 Bitcoin equal 1 Bitcoin. $1. So I know if I have 1 Bitcoin, I have 1/21 millionth of the supply of wealth. You have $100. Can you tell me what percentage that is of like Aussie dollars? Who can tell? No one knows. All we know is it just keeps getting printed. So 1 Aussie dollar or 1 US dollar today, I don't know what's going to be next year, but maybe 96 cents, maybe 90 cents, maybe 99 cents could keep its purchasing power of $1. Who knows? I don't know what my currency is worth in the future, but I know what my money is worth. And my money is worth 1/21 millionth of all of the Bitcoin supply, for example. All right, and that's the end of Act 2. So you've heard all about money and corruption and all that kind of stuff. Has anyone got any questions for me?
Dare I ask another?
Absolutely, of course. You're going to get a prize tomorrow, actually. I'll bring some prizes along with me.
Okay, so, I totally get the idea that Bitcoin is journey of the soul,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a very spiritual premise. But I kind of want to delve a little bit further into that because it's going back to the interplanetary notion. I mean, humans that want to go to space, that's no big deal because we can't really take notice of that, I don't think, because we have to look at the interplanetary connections and what's going on there beyond humans and what they're doing. So, does that make sense?
Yep, does make sense.
So, how does, given that we're still in the early adoption phase of Bitcoin, what is the bigger picture of this for our future? Because I feel that we can go from early adoption stage to a bigger take-up. Okay.
You'll know in the next 15 minutes. I'll make it very clear. Don't worry. But that's a great question.
Okay, and also because there's this whole kind of fear is bred within us, and that's how we're controlled. But I think this is about moving out of that.
It's getting freedom from the false fear we're fed.
Exactly.
And
Right.
Bitcoin is the money of the people. So why Bitcoin actually really matters, right? It matters for human rights and economic justice. So you see a lot of, there's this term, this phrase bandied around now called the SJW movements. So politically correct babies that cry about everything. If they were to learn about Bitcoin, they would become economic justice warriors overnight and throw away their social justice aspirations, because at the end of the day, all injustice is economic. If you can solve economic justice, you've solved social justice. You give people a job, you give people dignity, you don't spy on people, you don't censor people, you don't shut them out of their banking industry. That's why it's important. We have very good in the West. We don't really actually, we're just getting lied to. So we don't have to worry about having a stable currency, which is completely bullshit. When I came back from my MBA, one Aussie dollar would buy me $1.01. Now it buys me 67 cents. So we don't actually even have a stable currency. That's a 33% drop. Granted, it's over a long time, but that's a 33% drop. We don't have to worry about totalitarian governments spying on us and all that. But with that said, the Australian backdoor encryption laws is probably the most draconian measure in the whole world, maybe possibly even worse than China. China just spies. Australia legally mandates you to allow someone to spy on you. What's it called? The access something or other, right to invasion of privacy. So we don't have to worry about corrupt politicians confiscating our property here. Probably the Supreme Court would step in for us. But it isn't the case. All of this stuff that we don't have to worry about in the West doesn't apply to 5 billion people living under dictators, living under anything, not having a banking system, poor economy, you name it. So for these 5 billion people, Bitcoin gives them the chance of being self-sovereign and to be able to, store and move their wealth in an unconfiscatable and uncensored way. So for example, I'll give you an example of the Jews in World War II Europe. So they had everything confiscated by the Nazis. But the ones that knew some good chemistry used to make aqua d'or, which means gold water. So what you do is you make a chemical suspension, you melt all your gold in this water, in this suspension, and the jar of it just looks like yellow water. So the Nazis would come through, have a look for stuff to confiscate. They wouldn't have a second look at the gold water. And once the danger was done, or they could transfer it, they put some flocculants and whatever, and the gold sinks to the bottom of the solution, and there's your gold moved without confiscation. That's a lot harder to do now, and not everybody has the means to do that. But if you can remember 12 words in your head, you can carry $1 billion in your head and walk around with it. I wouldn't recommend doing that, because if you get copper knocked to your head, you'd lose everything. So no matter how volatile Bitcoin is, at least it's upwardly volatile, and that's what we showed. And it decreases in inflation all the time. We're effectively at zero inflation in like another 5 or 6 years. Not so much for other countries though, so let's have a look at the World Championships of Inflation from 1980. So, Bolivia, oh look at Bolivia go! Nosed out in front. Nicaragua said, hold my beer. And there she goes. Peru on the inside, Brazil following close by. Oh, look at Congo go. Russia creeping up. Ukraine now. Congo the big favorite to win this race. Angola, Bulgaria doing its time. Belarus. Oh, here's Congo making a comeback. No, Angola on show. Zimbabwe. Post-war Iraq, obviously, was in high contention for this race. Congo back in the lead. Belarus. Venezuela coming in strong on the inside. Venezuela. Oh, look at it go! So far this year, it's done another 1,000,000% in Venezuela. And this country has more oil than Saudi Arabia. So something to think about if you're a socialist. So Bitcoin needs to just be stable enough for the unbanked to rely on it for a circular economy. And you can take it to the bank. Bitcoin is more reliable than the Venezuelan bolivar and probably about 90 other countries. So Bitcoin has dropped from its all-time high. Well, actually, I'll talk about that when we get into investment. I'll talk about why Bitcoin actually isn't down that much. So just simply by buying and holding Bitcoin, you're providing this stability to the price that allows circular investments to happen, and you could actually be giving to the world's biggest humanitarian charity in history. There is no other charity like it where you can donate and enrich yourself as well. So not only enrich your soul through your donations, but also enrich yourself economically to have more power to affect the change you want to see. So the regular holder presents a flaw to the ecosystem, and we'll be talking a lot more about regular savings and dollar cost averaging when we get to the final act. So why Bitcoin is the money of the people? So it is the money of the people, and it fought off its biggest social attack in its history in August 2017, and the people proved they were up to the task and did win the war. So when it was proven that the Bitcoin was the people's money, Bitcoin tore off on a bull run that saw the price get to $20,000 US from only the $3,000 or $2,000 mark it was at that point. This was known as the user-activated soft fork, where it was the users, not the users particularly, the node users specifically, versus the Bitcoin establishment. So the Bitcoin establishment were the big mining companies, the big exchanges, all of these big, VC-funded broking firms and all of that. I don't know if anyone's ever looked up a Wikipedia article on any war. This is the Wikipedia version presentation of what happened. So it happened on the 1st of August. The location wasn't the node users, obviously. The location was the internet. I messed that one up. The victor was the people, the node users, and the result was activation of segregated witness, which was a highly contentious, or not highly contentious amongst the people, it was highly contentious amongst the establishment because it would mean a lower cut for them, cheaper fees, more throughput. So they didn't like it, they wanted more fees and bigger blocks, and they did that through the convening of the New York Agreement, and I'll talk about all that later. So yeah, and the result was the creation of an imitation coin called Bitcoin Cash, which split into Bitcoin Cash ABC and Bitcoin Cash SV, and it split again last night. But people still buy it. I don't know why. Probably promises of 100x their investment, but I can tell you it'll probably be 100% loss. So who are the commanders and leaders on the Bitcoin team? It was just some random Twitter anon. Wrote up some code, and he told the node users, if you want to keep blocks to 1 megabyte and activate segregated witness, here's how you vote. And if you don't want it, the establishment will get what they want. And the node users got behind Shell and Fry, ran the code, and on August the 1st we won. No casualties. The Axis lost billions of dollars through just wasted money marketing and killing their they had billions of dollars in their court to fight us, and they lost 100 million because of it. They had the majority of the mining power. They had like software in their mining machines which broke the social contract, so they were cheaters as well. And yeah, they lost $100 million in this fight trying to take over Bitcoin. They lost all their credibility, and we won. And when people saw that no one can take this away from the node users, all of a sudden the utility Bitcoin is worth 10 times more. So the criticality of running your own node cannot be understated, especially if you have a decent amount invested in Bitcoin. Because at any time someone comes for us, your node is your sword. And we'll revisit nodes more in the final act. But now you've had an idea of the characters, the users, the miners, the nodes. The nodes are the ultimate force on the blockchain. So that's the end of Act 3. So any questions for me? Absolutely.
The anti-money laundering policy.
Yes.
The attack on anonymity, which was the major strength of Bitcoin transaction.
Go on. So Bitcoin's a pseudonymous system, not anonymous. So with some good police work, and there's chain analysis companies now that do it, if you slip up, you'll get caught. Just requires some good police work. Now, layer 2 though in the stack, so if you're on Lightning Network, that is anonymous. So that might present a problem, but people always ask me, what happens if like government doesn't let Bitcoin happen? And I say, well, what happens if Bitcoin doesn't let government happen? So the KYC AML, like if you want to buy Bitcoin in Australia from an exchange, like you have to go through the anti-money laundering and KYC. But to stay truly private on Bitcoin is actually it's a Herculean effort.
Yeah.
So if you're pseudonymous, but the privacy is pretty low. So if somebody can just track one transaction to you, they'll just know your transaction history. But privacy is improving. So that protocol update that's coming, Schnorr and Taproot, will allow batching of signatures. So your transactions get batched in with other people's, and it allows more improvements related to privacy. But there'll be a lot more privacy coming to layer 1, and all other layers in the stack will be completely anonymous. But you couldn't, for example, send $10,000 through the Lightning Network. You could probably send $500 max at this point.
In New Zealand, cryptocurrency has been officially recognised as an asset and can now be paid as wages,
Yep.
as remuneration. So there's a real uptake of using the technology in emerging countries.
And I've heard there's no capital gains in New Zealand. Is that true?
Depends on how creative your accounting is.
Okay, yeah. Oh, you can pay for a creative accountant. You're all right.
Yeah. So that anti-money laundering policy is still necessary.
Look, people are going to kill me for hearing me say this. Look, if you're not doing anything wrong, like don't worry about it. But the problem is, like it might not be wrong now, and then in 10 years a dictator comes along and says, you know what, this is wrong. And they might, put you in a prison camp for something you did 10 years ago. But at the same time, when you use your credit card, that all goes on your statement, all of that kind of stuff. But there'll be a lot more privacy coming to Bitcoin. But Bitcoin now is effectively like email in 1990. Like no one could really use it. And then, 94, 95, Yahoo Mail and all that kind of stuff. And it just became easier to use. I do see Bitcoin becoming like probably private by default in maybe 3 to 4 years. You got to remember, because there's so much money at play, protocol improvement and consensus takes ages. So like this improvement, Schnorr, has been in the pipeline now for 2 years, and it's just had its now opening code review and comment period, and there's I think 1,000 people reviewing it now, and they have their review window is another like 3 months. Then there'll be like a 6-month testing window because money's at play. You don't want, something to go wrong. And then after that, the nodes will have to signal if they want to actually integrate this improvement or not. And if there's consensus that everybody likes the improvement, life goes on. If there's not a consensus, a fork will happen.
Sorry, Mike, just one thing. Have you heard of Dagcoin?
No. Unfortunately, no. No. Sorry.
My question, I don't know if this is relevant for anyone else, but I've always struggled from a Bitcoin perspective around its tangibility, and its usability. Like you said before, one Bitcoin's one Bitcoin, but if you bought it 18 months ago, it was worth 20 grand, and that's the reality, and now it's worth 8 or whatever it is.
But it's still one Bitcoin. It's still 1/21 millionth of all supply.
One shell.
Yeah. Yeah, but shells are garbage because there's true, but there's an unlimited amount of shells. So that's why people stopped using shells.
Yeah. So coming back to the tangibility, because maybe it's just because it's still such in its infancy and there's no utilization really of it. For me, it's all smoke and mirrors. Like literally, that's
even after all of this.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, because the history is history. Like there's always going to be wars. There's always going to be people think certain things are right and wrong and all that type of stuff. I really don't care about any of that. I want to go.
You do though, because you're funding the war with your tax dollars.
Sweet, that's great. I'm living in a pretty good country. Keep doing a great job. I don't care, like that stuff doesn't bother me. It happens. It's been happening for centuries and it's going to continue to happen for centuries. So it's part of life.
Not with an attitude like that, but I'll let you go on.
That's fine. That's what it's cool. So my question's really like around this is like, there's a gazillion cryptos, like a Dagcoin and all that as well. But for me, when it comes to Bitcoin, and I'm just picking on Bitcoin because we're talking about, I know there's a gazillion others as well. Like the tangibility factor, like how can I actually transact? No one ever seems to be able to give me an answer on that.
Yeah.
Because if I've got a currency, I want to be able to utilize it.
Yeah.
And like personally, I think it'd be crazy to utilize Bitcoin.
Of course.
Right now.
Yeah, of course.
But then I go, why have it?
Human rights. So human rights and the Cantillon effect is why we have it. Now, people that don't give a shit about human rights or Cantillon effect, they just won't come to Bitcoin.
It still doesn't, like the human rights factor, like anyone, you can say that about anything. You know what I mean? Like I think personally, and I'm happy to be wrong, I think that's a really weak argument personally, around we're going to change the world and all that. There's really not that much wrong with it. Like we're all living a pretty good life.
There's not much wrong with it for 20 million Australians, and personally I couldn't care if a single Australian got into Bitcoin. Like this is for the other 6 billion people.
Yeah.
So,
that's why I'm just trying to and it's Bitcoin, and I'm just trying to understand that. Like I know there will be something to be utilized down the track. So am I just naive because it's so early on, or is it that?
So for me, because I've never ever spent any Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And anyone who has Bitcoin here, if anybody ever offers you an option to pay in Bitcoin, unless you need anonymity and privacy with what you're buying, spend your garbage Aussie dollars because they're not worth anything. So Bitcoin's main point now is store of value. And if people say it's a poor store of value because it's dropped 55% or whatever it is, wait till you see DCA. When was the first time you heard about Bitcoin?
Oh, probably 3-4 years ago, as long as I've been in the community.
All right, so I'm going to get everyone here to do an exercise in a little bit when I get to DCA, and you'll see why.
Yeah. But that's my thing. Like I'm just trying to understand like what its tangibility is, what its true.
Well, it is. It's intangible, and its value is. If I have $1 billion that I want to send without anyone knowing about it, this is very valuable to me. If I'm a very, 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 very rich Syrian and the country's gone to shit and I need to go out with my, big bank balance, having Bitcoin is very, very useful for me. And Bitcoin is useful to a lot of people. So I've shown you there's $3 quadrillion floating around. So Bitcoin is a huge hedge, and it's useful for people. I can't get into all the examples of its utility, but anything with utility is worth something. So Bitcoin now at $0.17 trillion of market cap is only 3 times bigger than Uber. Smaller than Facebook, smaller than all this. So it's a minnow that still needs a long time in its life, and we'll get to its life when I analogize Bitcoin to a startup. So.
Do you want to just finish?
I hear what John's saying in terms of tangibility, and I think that's because, our society thinks in terms of economics. But I think what House is actually proposing, the premise behind Bitcoin is so much bigger than just economics. I mean, it's offering, and even to use the word humanitarian is going to shut people off from seeing the power of it. I mean, it goes back to the sovereignty that it's offering.
Not just that, how many journalists now have been cancelled for not going along with the groupthink? People on Patreon being cancelled, people taken off YouTube. So WikiLeaks is one of the world's biggest Bitcoin holders. Do you know why? Because MasterCard banned WikiLeaks. No one could get money to them for donations. They're like, all right, we'll take Bitcoin. And back then it was like $50 a Bitcoin, and now like WikiLeaks' legal fund, they have tens of millions of dollars. So like I said, what if government doesn't let WikiLeaks happen? Well, WikiLeaks adopted Bitcoin, and now they're not letting government happen. So it's one of those things. So like I said, not a journey of the bank balance, a journey of the soul. Now, if you're happy with the idea of slavery, growth for the sake of growth that's fueling consumption and environmental. So
you cannot say that though. You cannot say that Bitcoin is going to stop slavery.
That's fine. All I can say is wait and see. That's all I can say.
Can't say that.
Yeah.
But that's what I mean. Like the world's the world. That's why I'm like. That's not like I'm sure there's something there. I just haven't heard it yet. And that's me. And I know like there's probably a gazillion other people out there that are like me that are going. We know that there's something here, but no one's explained it to us in that simple, tangible way without fuck the system and all of this stuff to make it actually reliable.
It seems like you're more attached to an emotional standpoint than you are interested in listening to what the other.
So
how am I going to use it viably?
Well, you're looking at it as if you're supposed to use it viably as opposed to what it's going to become. It's like.
It's like an internet.
Look, in terms of when can I spend my Bitcoin, here's the answer. After it IPOs. So we're going to go through now the VC train of Bitcoin as a startup company.
I hope that was okay, everyone.
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
I've just ordered a couple of boxing gloves.
I'm definitely a lover, not a fighter, and because I don't like fighting and war.
Yeah, Carl. Hang on, Brett.
I just want to know, in regards to this becoming private, people don't own this, where do you see this moving forward for governments that supply hospitals, roads, infrastructure? Who's going to do that? Where do you see it?
So I'm a civil engineer, so I'll be happy to build the roads for you, no worries. And I can build one for you for half price that the government can, because I used to work for Transurban and I built the M5. So what you can do is you can do distance charging over Lightning Network. So every kilometer you drive, user pays. Governments are going to have to rationally react to this reality. So they'll have to embrace it. A world-leading country could say, come to Australia and mine Bitcoin off our unlimited solar power, and pay tax in Australia, draw income here.
I'm a blockchain fan.
Yeah.
Do you actually see every country actually creating their own token?
Yes, I do. Simply because it's easier to surveil people with a token than it is with cash. So all governments are going to have their own shitcoin. Every government will have a surveillance coin. Yeah.
Everyone around will be dealing with that shit. Yeah.
So, it's not a lie, and it's not a stretch to say, like, if you think we're not being spied on in Australia, like you haven't been watching the news, like that backdoor thing was news everywhere in the world. So we do need it now.
We're also assuming that hospitals and roads are going to be things of the future.
Look, like I said, it's only a brief primer. But in the future, when things even out, you will see sort of an income or wealth bell curve. And you'd want, like the Rockefellers did, although they were quite evil, they did abide by this concept called noblesse obligée, which means the obligations of the nobles. And you'll find that the 2 to 3 standard deviations away from the mean will take care of the other 2 to 3 standard deviations away from the mean. So look, societal and structural changes come after economic changes. So I don't know how you guys could have been looking at that thing talking about quadrillions and expect the current system to go as planned, and we do need a plan B. But let's go back to Bitcoin as a startup, and all of these different rounds correspond to reward eras. So let's have a look at the pre-seed round, which was between January 2009 and November 2012. There was an extreme risk of failure, and you were probably liable to 60% swings in a few days. The earliest developers and speculators were the equity holders in this company, and the company was effectively just going through protocol improvements and debuggings. Also, though, you had the first exchanges started to get launched and hacked very frequently. When the cash injection came, a lot of the earliest developers sold down and had enough money in their bank balances to start working full-time on Bitcoin. So all of a sudden you start seeing the developer effort increase exponentially as these earlier developers get richer and sell down. And there was a terrible user experience. And if there's a word worse than terrible, that's how bad it was. So then we moved into the seed round, and this was sort of a double drawdown. So you had your cash in from your investors, a bit more of a sell down, but because Bitcoin is a minnow, all it takes is a couple of $1 million, and there was another cash injection. A lot of the early birds again sold back down and dedicated their life to Bitcoin, improving its utility and therefore increasing value per coin. So in the seed round, there was a very high risk of failure, and you were still subject to 50% swings up or down in a matter of days. The earliest developers and speculators are still the main equity holders. And yeah, like I said, more and more people added to the exponential, the exponential development with developers cashing out and giving themselves runway. You also had the beginning of the age of ASIC mining, so end of the panning days. More protocol improvements and hardening, more robust exchanges. They were still getting hacked though. The first hardware wallets came onto the market, but still very, very, very terrible UI UX. Series A, where we're at now, big cash injection. Because the war of the UASF was fought right here. So before even reaching the previous peak. So after the war was won, huge cash in. It's now, instead of very high risk of failure, it's only a high risk of failure. And you're susceptible to 40% swings in a matter of days. 3 weeks ago, we had a 40% day. Bitcoin spiked 40% from 7 grand to 10.5 US dollars. I'm speaking. Right now, the earliest developers are still the main equity holders, but only just. And like I said, just for this, like the pace of. So I've been in Bitcoin for 6 years now. And in the past year, I've seen more development and upgrades than I have in the previous 5 years. Simply because now there's just more full-time Bitcoin developers, because they've been able to, cash out 100 grand, and that 100 grand will sustain them for 3 years. And you'll notice the injections happen almost like clockwork every couple of years, especially after a halving, because it just gets scarcer and scarcer. It's simple supply and demand. So next on, Series B, which in the typical VC world is called the building stage. So the risk of your investment has now dropped to medium. I still reckon 30% swings in a day or two are possible, simply because if somebody decides they want $10 million of Bitcoin today, they'll knock the price up 20%. Like it doesn't, like Bitcoin is nothing at the moment. Seeing a $100,000 Bitcoin would still put Bitcoin at only like, a 10% of, the amount of gold that's above ground. So like Bitcoin still has a long way to run. So the earliest developers and speculators they're no longer the main equity holders, but they're all now multimillionaires that are working full-time in Bitcoin. Layer 3 is actually currently getting built out, so we don't even have to wait till April 2020. And more redundancy, more satellites, better products. In the next difficulty era, once Schnorr and Taproot are activated, you'll be able to have massively multi-sig addresses. And we'll talk about what a multi-sig address is. It's basically, you guys ever seen any movies where they have like nuclear codes in the Pentagon and they need to do a nuke and they have to get the president, vice president, secretary of defense, like they've got to get a few people with keys. Same as multi-sig. So you can do currently now on Bitcoin like a 7 of 9 multi-sig, where you need 7 keys out of the full 9 to do a transaction. When the protocol gets improved, this will effectively be unlimited. So let's say a huge super fund or Goldman Sachs or something were in custody of $500 billion worth of Bitcoin. What they'd be able to do to ensure no risk of loss is they could do something like a 70 of 90 scheme, where the general manager of every office in the world has a key, and 70 of them need to come together to move coldly stored funds. And then in funds that you can set up like 2 of 3 keys with a small balance for every office, and they'll have like delegated approval for money spending, delegated authority. So the US is vastly improving. Even now, the UI and UX is improving markedly, and we'll talk about that when we talk about the nodes. And during this time, we can expect the layer 1 to ossify. Now, what that means is just to become harder, more inert, and like effectively no longer like improvable. Or if there are improvements, they'll be moving very, very glacially. This is because you need basically a rock-solid, unchangeable base protocol, so you can allow the layers to build on top of it. And you will see like ossification of layer 2, layer 3, layer 4. So the amount of layers that you can lay on Bitcoin is just similar. It's just like an onion, similar to the internet. So then we'll have Series C, which will be between 2024 and 2027. And Series C is the scaling. So again, we're not talking widespread scaled till 2024 to 2027. So it's still very, very, very early in Bitcoin's life. So at this point, it's a low risk of failure. You probably only have to cop 20% gains or losses over a couple of days. At this point, I see market cap of Bitcoin being about $1 trillion. So 5 or 6 times more than it's worth now. And still only 1/8 of the market cap of gold. And yeah, more layers, more redundancies, probably branching into satellite internet provision as well. So there'll be horizontal and vertical integration of companies. So miners will start buying brokers. They might start buying electricity plants. So in America now, there's a company called Layer 1. It's just raised $200 million. $50 million from Peter Thiel, co-founder of PayPal and billionaire at large. And they're basically building a power plant, a mining ASIC chip factory, hiring their own hardware engineers, and using Texas wind to bring mining back to America instead of having China dominate it. Because even though governments are you guys got to remember that governments are very, very incompetent people. So I used to be involved in politics as a younger age, and maybe that's what drove me to Bitcoin. But hanging around the young versions of the parties, so young Liberal, young Labour, most of these people, their sole ambition is power. They're usually incompetent, not very good at uni. They go campaigning for a candidate, and if they impress and suck up to the candidate enough, and it's called the flying squad, and the candidate wins, they just become career career staffers, and they bide their time, and they end up becoming treasurers of fucking countries, believe it or not. So having been in one of these young movements, you have nothing to look forward for. I'm very sorry, like you have nothing to look forward to. So if America was smart, for example, as smart as Peter Thiel, who like was also like his analytics was basically the only analytics that predicted the Trump victory. So this guy's knows data. He knows, where the puck is moving. A very, very smart, capable, technological individual. But I lost my train of thought, so I won't waste any more time because we're starting to run out of time. So one of the last stages is IPO, very low risk of failure. You're still liable to 10% swings because it's just still so small. But at IPO, I see a $1 million Bitcoin, which will make the market cap 21 trillion. So only, a couple of times more than gold. And at the current rate of inflation in 10 years, your average house in Sydney will probably be worth $3 million. So like Bitcoin is a fixed amount, and the potential cash that can find its way into Bitcoin is unlimited. So it's naturally upwardly volatile forever. And layer 5 solutions will probably get built out. After the IPO period, you'll have a blue chip period where the risk is effectively zero, and Bitcoin is really, really coming into its own as a medium of exchange on top of a store of wealth. So you can actually then think about spending your Bitcoin without having that regret that you spend it and the next day it drops 40%. You might just have a stock market-like volatility amongst blue chips, or you just have 1 or 2% volatility every day. So that's the end of Act 4. Any new questions after Act 4?
So, so if you're thinking about volatility, then in reality you're still believing that the massive adoption's not really going to happen because it's got to be volatile against something else.
Yeah.
See, I see it as a time where our grandkids don't even know what fiat is.
Yeah, that's
right?
going to be. I think.
Because one, like you said, one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think any kid that's born now, this year, when they're 18, they won't even notice they're using Bitcoin.
So where are you getting your wallet? That's what I'm trying to get at, right?
So I'll tell you how. Yeah. So I'll tell you how though. So right now Bitcoin is worth, I don't know, 8,500 US. Let's just round up, call it 10 grand, and you have currently 1,800 Bitcoins getting mined a day. So to keep the price steady, you only need $18 million of investment a day, which is about 6 billion a year, which is about nothing. Because just look at, WeWork. Well, WeWork went tail up, but just look at these big IPOs. It's not much, 6 billion a year. Next year, if there's no change in demand, that the block reward gets halved to 900 coins a day. So if there's no change in demand, Bitcoin's price necessarily doubles. But because there's improvements to the protocols, demand will increase. So if demand does increase a little bit and then it holds steady for 4 years and the demand stays consistent, in 4 years Bitcoin will necessarily double because the price is halved. And yeah, if you double enough times, there's an old proverb: if you get a chessboard and put a piece of rice on the first square and put double the amount of rice on every subsequent square, do you know how many pieces of rice you'll have on the chessboard by the end of it? Something like septillions. So it doesn't take many doublings to get Bitcoin from 10 grand to $1 million bucks. So if there is no change in demand at all, it'll be $1 million Bitcoin. Now at that point, it's very hard to move a $21 trillion market cap industry, at least downwards, because
so
just...
what I'm getting at is, where's the volatility? We want to have a Bitcoin as the savior of the world. It's got to be volatile, pegged against something. Because the hardest part is, guys, we still think in dollar terms,
yeah.
Right? So that's why we get the shits when it's 20 grand one day, $4 the next. Yeah. But I look and I go, you won't. Our future generations, and I do believe it's grandkids, they won't know what a dollar is. They'll just go down and pay 8 Satoshi for whatever. So I'm wondering why.
Yeah. So what will happen?
you've got this great plan, and that's the best I've ever seen in terms of how to explain where Bitcoin's at, and that is great. But I'm really curious because you're such a believer.
So in the world I
You're
see,
pegging it
yeah.
against something
So in the world I see, I'll give my my kids 100 Satoshi allowance. They'll go get a coffee today for 8 Satoshi, and when they go to get their coffee in a month, they only have to pay 7 Satoshi, because the price of coffee has decreased relative to the value of Bitcoin because it's so rare. So it'll be deflationary. So if you work hard at your day job, if anyone has ever done laboring before, you want your labor to preserve itself. So when you put money in the bank saving, you expect to take this money out and give you something fair. So if you're earning wage in Bitcoin, you're storing your wealth, and your wealth isn't being robbed of you by anyone. It's growing while you're storing it. So it's designed to be deflationary. Simply because now the thing is, Bitcoin isn't an assault on the legacy system. Assaulting something is a waste of time. Trying to change something is a waste of time. We're just building something parallel. We're working on it. We're investing on it. Anyone who wants to come along to our parallel ideology and system of economics is free to join. We're not going to put a gun against anyone's head.
That's what I'm saying.
It's voluntary.
So
yeah.
there'll be potentially the two systems working side by side, and you get to choose one.
But I think when fiat currencies start to tumble, like those highly inflationary ones, it'll just be a domino effect. But
unfortunately, you've only got 5 months left.
Yeah. No, I've got 8 minutes. I'm counting. So risk management. So for most of you guys, Bitcoin is going to be the most dangerous thing you ever touch in your life. It's very, very volatile, and it as in its own right needs to maintain its security through running of nodes and all of that. Now I will say one thing that's maybe impolite or confrontational. You'd have to be a fucking moron to have bought Bitcoin at 20 grand because it was only there for about a day. So if you just picked 3 weeks either side of it, you would have picked up cheap Bitcoin. But that's where DCA comes in, and that's what we're going to have a look at. So you can't trust anyone but yourself to verify anything, so I recommend running a node. You have to manage your private keys, which is hard to do. Money's involved, so people will be looking to scam you. And if somebody's come up to you and says, you know what, we found the next Bitcoin, that's bullshit. Bitcoin is the next Bitcoin. It's as simple as that. Anything useful in other cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin just merges it into their cryptocurrency. So they tried SegWit on Litecoin, looked like it was okay, they tested it there, and we pulled it in. There will be heaps of things that we will pull in if they're useful, but because money's involved, we just got to stress test them a lot. But there's nothing that any crypto, so for example, there's another improvement called Rootstock RSK, and that'll effectively replicate Ethereum on the Bitcoin blockchain, so you don't even need Ethereum anymore. Lightning.
What's Bitcoin SV?
Oh, there's a scam. Yeah, we won't get into Bitcoin SV.
Yeah.
So
It's the true one. The true
yeah.
Please don't.
All right. So here's some personal rules of thumb for securing Bitcoin. Now these are personal rules, my opinion. So they're not. Everybody has to see what their own risk tolerance is. But for a mobile wallet with a seed word backup, I'd be happy for you to put it on your phone, because most people have a $1,500 phone anyway. And if you lose your phone, you can still recover your money if you've taken good care of your seed word backup. Anywhere between 3 grand and 25 grand, I recommend a hardware wallet, which they only go for about $100. Anything between 25 grand and 250 grand should be a 2 of 3 multi-signature. Now, these numbers look big, right? But if you invest in Bitcoin, that 5 grand can turn into 50 grand before you know it, and you have a security problem on your hands. If you're going, 1% to 5% of portfolio, like people usually take the gold approach, you're probably already looking at $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, $10,000. So that, that can, in a flash, some people that bought in 2010. They're trying their best to secure 10, 15, 20, 30 million dollars. And, you have risks to life and limb, people coming to kidnap you or kidnap your kids, or there's a lot of things. And now I'll talk about a bit more about multi-signature next, and the level of security that's now available. So wallets, that's the main place where you store and transact and receive all your Bitcoin, and there's a couple of them. So you can store your Bitcoins on exchange if you're really brave, but I wouldn't do it because exchanges are easy to hack. Especially ones, unfortunately, that aren't Bitcoin only. Because Bitcoin is known, you can plug it into your website and sell it and all that kind of stuff, but all of the altcoins, you have to design systems specifically for the altcoins, and most exchanges that have been attacked have been through a side attack via an altcoin. So yeah, they're just trouble in general, altcoins. So you can have a mobile wallet on your phone. Geez, the true color has gone off, but this is supposed to be orange, yellow, and green. Multi-signature is the way to go if you're defending a good amount of coins. So general rules, not your keys, not your coins. So if you're not holding your own private keys, they're not your coins. So Maduro from Venezuela, the other year rang up the Bank of England and said, listen, I need my gold reserves back. And Bank of England was like, what gold? Yeah, seriously, what gold? And they said, look, we can't trust that you're not going to spend it ethically, so we're not giving you your gold back. Same thing with Bitcoin. Not your keys, not your coin. The exchange might get pissed off and say, you know what, we're not going to let you withdraw. So whenever you get a bit of money on exchange, take it off there. Mobile wallet. The pros are you do hold your own keys. You can back up your keys, and good wallets let you connect directly to your own node. That'll be sitting at home. Backups is like you're the single point of failure, and if your phone dies and you lose your backup, you've lost your keys. Some good mobile wallets are the Keymaster by Casa, and that's an all-in-one solution for node management, hardware wallets, multi-signature, everything. And when you visit keys.casa, if you're just banging IAWC, I've managed to hook you guys all up with a 10% discount on any membership you'd like. They have a free membership, a gold membership, a platinum, and a diamond. Where diamond, they even actually do inheritance planning for you. But that's a bit rich for my blood. That costs $5,000 a year for that service. But again, if you're securing $15, $20, $50 million worth of Bitcoin, because you only need, people were mining 50 Bitcoins every 10 minutes on their laptops in 2009. So having 1,000 Bitcoins for the guys that have been, 7 to 8 years ago. So I've been here for 6 years, but when I got in, I was one of those morons that bought Bitcoin for $1,000 and had to see it go down to $200. But I DCA'd, and we'll talk about DCA after we go through wallets finally. Hardware wallets, same as the mobile, but your keys are never exposed to the internet. But again, you're a single point of failure. And the hardware can be hacked. If there's a good enough hacker that knows about secure elements, you might be able to get hacked if you lose physical access to your hardware wallet. So Coldcard is a great wallet, but that's for power users. Trezor is another great and popular hardware wallet, so is Ledger. Trezor and Ledger are compatible with the Casa suite of products, and Coldcard will also be soon as well. So Multisig, as I said, allows you to spread your keys over multiple hardware wallets and locations. So if one gets stolen, you'll be fine. It's not a big deal. No cons to multi-sig wallets. Nodes, as I said earlier, exist to verify all transactions, and to that end need to download all of Bitcoin's transaction history. So when you have a node, you have every single transaction ever recorded on the blockchain at your disposal to analyze and verify. Blockchain is about 260 gig right now, and 50 gig a year increases. BSV wants unlimited caps, so you'll need to add 45,000 terabytes a year to run a Bitcoin SV node. So you're looking at maybe $20 million a year to run a node. So nodes need to run 24/7. Cheap computers, they only use about 10 watt, so they'll cost you about $25 a year to run if you want to run a node. There's a lot of plug and play nodes now that you can order. So my nodes are good for sort of power users. I'm sure these slides will be available. I'll try and make them available. CASA. So you get, with CASA, you get a year of gold membership. You get, they send you a free hardware wallet. They send you a free Faraday bag for your hardware wallet, so no one could spy by noise. And if an EMP hits your hardware wallet, it should still be okay. And it's just an absolutely great product. They have a mobile wallet, a browser extension to pay with Lightning. It's great. I'm a CASA Platinum member. They give you multi-signature for free on a silver package, but if you lose one of your keys, they'll charge you 0.1% of your balance to do a recovery. But if you're on gold or above, multiple cosigns are possible, but they'll only cosign for you if you do a video call with them. So if you do have a distress word and you have been kidnapped, you just say your distress code on the video call, and they'll make sure to shut everything down. There's the Nodal as well, which is also for extreme power users, but we'll tick through that. Run your own node. If you just give me 3 more minutes to talk about DCA. So the general rules: hold, never sell until it's time to spend. When you can start spending in Bitcoin, then start spending it. Otherwise, hold it. Finally, slow and steady wins the race. Now for the interactive bit. I want everyone to pull out their phones. So DCA is when you take the exact same amount of fiat currency and buy Bitcoin every week. So now that your phones are out, I want you to visit a website called DCABTC.com. So once that's loaded up, I'd like everyone to fill in the boxes that are prompted. DCA, so dollar cost average, DCA, BTC, Bitcoin. And I want you to start filling in the boxes. So just assume, whether you put $1 in the assumed investment amount or $100 doesn't matter, because it's based on percentages. I want you to just assume you've put in $100 a week, right? Since the first time you ever heard about Bitcoin, and just click on accumulate for 9 years. So that's what I want you to do. The first time you ever heard about Bitcoin, punch that date in roughly. So you don't need to go to a particular month or a day, just roughly when you first heard about it, and have a look at where you'd be had you started just $100 a week when you first heard about it. Does anyone want to throw some results at me? You don't have to if you're embarrassed. That's fine. So even though Bitcoin's trading at about 9 grand, over 55% down from its all-time high, if you were silly enough to buy it at its all-time high and never buy again. But if you did DCA from that day, you haven't lost a penny since the all-time high. In fact, you're up 30%. Now, every other altcoin, if you bought it at its all-time high and you DCA'd, you're still financially ruined. Whereas Bitcoin, you've made money. Why? Because it was only in that madness only happened for about 6 weeks. So you only would have purchased 6 times. And then when it was down in the gutter at 3 grand, you were picking it up, non-stop. So since the 2017 ATH, Bitcoin's down 55%, but up 28.7. Since the 2013 ATH, all-time high, it's up 1,100%. Since the start of this year, January 1st, up 40%. The other comparisons to gold and USD. Since start of 2018, up 30. Since start of 2017, up 132, 16, 474, 15, 1,000. So as you can see, slow and steady wins the race. And just don't be an idiot and get caught up into FOMO just for the sole reason of coming to a Bitcoin conference and say, hey, Bitcoin's down. Like, it's not. You were just silly to buy Bitcoin after all you got sucked into FOMO, but all the mistakes can be corrected in time with DCA. And I'm telling you from experience, because I had to eat an 80% drawdown in 2013. And you just got to be patient. Don't get sucked into FOMO. Set yourself a budget every week, what you can afford to pay, and put it on autopilot. So good means of autopilot. Independent reserve, they're especially good for self-managed super funds and large purchases. So I have a self-managed super fund, 80% Bitcoin, 20% cash. I have more likelihood that my Bitcoin will be worth something than what my pension fund will be worth. in my opinion, because I don't have access to it for another 27 years. I guarantee you pension funds will be insolvent in 27 years. So if you go through this link, there's no incentives other than you can go through like the turbo KYC, so you can be up and running very quickly. And I think with Amber, do you guys give them a little something for that QR code?
Yeah, I think so. Is this the referral one?
Yeah.
One? I think you both get 5/5, right?
I don't know.
I hope so.
Yeah. Well, either way, you can feel free to check out both. And does anybody? I see some glum faces in the room because it looks like many of you probably heard about Bitcoin a long time ago. So some additional readings. I'm going to just leave this to when you pick up the slides. We've got local podcasts from here. Stefan Levera is one of the industry leaders. Ministry of Nodes does workshops in Sydney for security workshops, running nodes, setting up multi-signature, all that kind of stuff. If you're brave enough to roll your own.
You get paid to run a node? Is it like
If you have a Casa node,
Yeah.
you get paid to run a node. So for you, they have a SATS app. You send a heartbeat to your node every day to just make sure it's online. And for doing that, they incentivize you with 10,000 Satoshi a week. So for someone like me, like 10,000 Satoshi is crazy. That's going to be $100 in 10 years. So just by checking in on my node every week, it's $100. That's $5,000 a year. In 15 years, I can pick up that $5,000. So check out Ministry of Nodes if you ever want to go to a workshop. Casa is a plug-and-play node, so everyone's got that discount code.
Thank you.
And that's the end of the presentation. Thank you.
That was fantastic.